Okay, so welcome everybody. We are going to read a recent speech from Mother where she was talking to some YSP members. And I titled it, her guidance for future leaders, because she's really speaking specifically to that topic. And those of you who were here last week remember that I wasn't sure if I should skip what I was going to do last week to do this one, because I thought it was really interesting and relevant. But now we finally get to do it today. And this was on May 30th, so pretty recently, within the last month. Okay, so you are indeed the central figures of the Chenoguk era. Do you understand? Yes, the central figures. And this sentence was what made me excited about this whole speech and why I wanted to read it, because I think some of the challenges I've been having is this referencing the old way of doing things in our church. And I think there are aspects that come more naturally to our generation that sometimes are hard to put into word, like how to build a team, and how to take care of people, and how to build a culture, how to be in your family and also do public work. These are things that I think our generation really kind of are exemplifying. And it's not something you can just talk about. It's something you really have to practice in your life. And I feel like that's what it means to be a central figure of this Chenoguk era. There was the preparation, the wilderness era, which our parents really led, but there's a shift that has to happen now. And I think Mother is recognizing it. And she makes it very clear, the central figure, she says it twice to make sure we understand that's who we are. Due to the birth and first coming of God's only begotten daughter, after 6,000 years, true parents emerged. You are second and third generation children who received the blessing from the true parents, right? Yes. And I think that we probably are noticing some common themes in Mother's recent speeches here. And this is an interesting statement. She says, due to the birth and first coming of God's only begotten daughter, true parents emerged. And so she is really differentiating that true parents could not exist without the only begotten daughter. And that's in contrast to Jesus's course, where he was not able to be married, and highlighting how important it is Mother's coming as the first only begotten daughter, the first feminine, representation of God, and how that was kind of the signal for true parents to be able to emerge. Without that, true parents could not emerge. So over and over, she's highlighting the importance of this role of the only begotten daughter, not because she wants to be glorified, but because of what it means to be able to represent true parents fully. And so we are the children who receive that blessing. We're the children of true parents, the children of true mother and true father. She says, you are the center. Regardless of whether you are assigned to a village or a small church, wherever that is, as central figures, you must teach the truth of providential history properly. And I love this. I love that the idea of no matter what I'm involved in, right, what ministry or what community I'm involved in, True Mother is helping us recognize we are the center, even if externally we have no position, no role, no authority, but internally we're the center. And I think that kind of gives me a little confidence, a little more hope, a little more trust of my own inclination and my own sensibilities of what's right and what's wrong and what needs to change. Because True Mother's recognizing our generation is the center wherever we go. And over in her recent speeches, she's talking about teaching the truth of providential history properly. She says it in different ways, but over and over, she's kind of honing in on the point that providential history has not been taught properly up until this point. And I have a theory that a lot of it has to do with some of the content that came out when we were in Korea, which I know hasn't been fully released. But as we've been studying Mother's speeches, certain themes have been coming up, which came up there as well. And I think a lot of it has to do with who True Mother is, and True Mother's primary responsibility as kind of the key central figure of this era to restore what hasn't happened yet, and kind of the misunderstanding of providential history. Over and over, Mother's talking about the last 6 years of our church, and she's kind of lamenting over how difficult it's been and how some things haven't happened the way they should have happened, and trying to clear up the past. And I feel like Mother is really counting on us and our generation to be able to step into that light and be honest and to teach things properly, because there have been some misunderstandings. And I mean, we know that it wouldn't, when Mother took over, right, it wouldn't have been such a difficult transition if people really understood who true parents were and understood who true Mother was. But when Mother took over, so many people questioned her, and now we have different schisms and things like that. But I think Mother knows we understand a little more naturally. There's not as much of a struggle to try to understand who she is and what her role and responsibility is, and to kind of look at the things our church has done to understand not everything was perfect, but we still claim the victories that we can along the way. And she continues here, you aren't afraid of Christians, am I right? Which is really an interesting question. I just will pause there. And I think maybe probably most of us can relate. Growing up in the church, there was a little bit of fear of Christians, of being misunderstood, of being judged, and also we were kind of taught this limited view of Christianity, that maybe Jesus had failed in his mission or things like that, and a little bit of judgment towards Christianity ourselves, because the fullness of Jesus's heart wasn't always understood. And it wasn't until I started working with YCLC that I broke through in that in myself. And I think our generation is kind of breaking through in that in general, to be proud, also to be welcomed. It's so meaningful to be welcomed and understood by Christians instead of judged or misunderstood or accused. So, but it's just interesting, Mother's highlighting that to the YSP leaders right now, because she probably recognizes Christianity is where we have to break through the most in order to really, change the whole world, to get the whole world on board and moving in a certain direction. And she says they've been waiting 2,000 years for the return of the Messiah who said he would come again. However, they are unaware of this providence, and while they waited in uncertainty, 2,000 years passed. Yet they say that our unification church is heretical. Please talk with them confidently. What is it that Jesus, who says he will come again, hopes for? Can you speak boldly? Yes. Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of intrigued why Mother is speaking about this topic to YSP leaders. This is YSP leaders in Korea. In America, I think it'll be easy understanding, but Mother's really picking up probably how important it is for our generation to be reaching Christianity. And she's recognizing that we are misunderstood, that people call us heretical and won't work with us sometimes because of what we believe, and they have some kind of, opinion of us or experience with us. But she's asking us to speak boldly and to really question, why was Jesus coming again? What was his hope? What was his dream? And be able to have conversation based on that understanding. For Jesus to emerge as the true parent, he must meet God's only begotten daughter in substantial form. Then God's dream will be realized. 2,000 years ago, Jesus was the first coming of the only begotten Son, wasn't he? Yes. So I think what comes up for me in this section is, where some of us might be reading the 1-hour DP manual, lecture manual. And, if I'm being honest, I find it really lacking actually in kind of a broader true parents understanding of really Jesus's mission, the mission of the Messiah, and why Jesus has to come again. And it's this emphasis, Mother over and over again is emphasizing that Jesus, when he comes again, needs to meet the only begotten daughter. And that's kind of the view of providential history, I think hasn't been highlighted as much. I can think about growing up, a lot of times it was Father inherited Jesus's mission, and Father came to complete Jesus's mission. But Mother's kind of broadening that scope a little bit here to clarify that the purpose of Jesus coming again was to be married, was to be blessed, was to meet the only begotten daughter. And that's what we should be highlighting more than anything. And I appreciate that, right? That feels like a rounder view, that feels like a family-centered view. And it's certainly very different from a Christian view. So it can be very difficult to get to that point in teaching people. But she's asking us to really highlight it and hone in on it. Since God could not achieve this dream at that time, the only way the will can be accomplished is if Jesus, who said he would return, meets the only begotten daughter. However, it was only after 6,000 years that God sent his only begotten daughter to earth through the Korean people. So again, she's highlighting how important it is mother's birth, 6,000 years, the first coming of the only begotten daughter in Korea, and that this is who Jesus was supposed to meet. And I wonder why mother over and over is talking about this. I feel sorry for her that she has to be the one to explain it. And one of the things that stood out to me when we were in Korea is that mother has been waiting 60 years to be able to share some of this content with us. And when I'm studying her recent speeches, I'm really noticing that she's kind of talking about things she hasn't talked about until recently. Somehow she feels like it's time to address certain things. It's time to make certain things more clear. But at the same time, I'm feeling kind of sorry that she has to be the one to explain it, that she has to be the one to clarify her role, lift up her own role for her own sake, because, you could be so easily misunderstood if you're constantly lifting yourself up, but it's because we don't really get it yet. Our leaders don't really get it yet. A lot of our members don't really get it yet. And, I saw that in Korea too, that the content from the lecturer, a lot of people had a hard time with. And when like the Q&A came, there was, some harsh accusations given out because people disagreed with this kind of thinking. But I think for us, like, the reason why mother can speak so honestly with us is because I think we grew up in the church, and I think we naturally understand certain sensibilities, especially all of us women, right? I think we more naturally understand the importance of women. So as the only begotten daughter, I made my determination, therefore. I resolved to walk the path of true parents. This is also an important point. Yes, it resulted in many blessed families being given birth. And this point, I think is an important content point because in Korea, some of the education talked about the difference between being the first coming and the second coming. And the first coming is born into that role from their birth, from their original entrance into the world. Whereas the second coming, Father inherited Jesus's mission when he was on the mountainside, right? And he had this prayerful experience. And of course, Father was prepared, right? No one's saying he wasn't. Absolutely, he was. But it's different because he's the inheritor. At a certain point, he had to accept it. But the point being made is that, mother was born into this role. And so she's walked it from the very beginning, and it's different. Doesn't mean it's better than or anything like that, but it's just different to think about. And yeah, she's highlighting here that she resolved to walk this path, knowing that she was the only begotten daughter. And that was what stood out to me about mother's memoir the most, is how clear her own voice was to herself from such a young age. And when she's looking back on her life, I don't think I could have done that. I don't think I could have had that kind of heart and understanding from such a young age. But I feel like the impression I had growing up of mother was she was assigned to this, wife of father kind of role, and she accepted that assignment. But instead, her storyline is actually she knew going into it what was happening, and she knew she had a certain calling, and she took that responsibility at such a young age, because I'm inferring because she was born of a certain way, of a certain lineage, to be prepared to take on that role. Come to think of it, you are very fortunate people. In the early days, the church could not support your seniors when they went out witnessing. As a result, they faced persecution and other challenges in many of the mission locations. Even in challenging situations where they could not have even one meal a day, your parents and seniors single-mindedly followed this one path. And when I read mother's speeches, I try to really think, why is she bringing up certain points at certain times to certain people? And I think something that comes up for me here is how if you're lifting up young people and saying, you guys are the centers of the providence and you're the real central figures and, that kind of thing, we can start to think too highly of ourselves. And I think I'm guilty of that sometimes, right? Like I'm good at this, or I know this, or this kind of thing. And I can be quick to judge sometimes or to look down on others, especially some of our elders who, grew up a certain way and had to sacrifice certain experiences in order to serve God's providence. But I feel like what Mother's doing here is making sure our heart is in the right place. Even as she's lifting us up, she's also asking us to understand the course of our seniors and our elders who really walked very difficult courses. I mean, she's talking about not even being able to eat one meal a day, but they didn't give up, they kept going and they kept sacrificing. And I feel like sometimes it's hard. It's almost like we could be speaking different languages to our elders sometimes. They walked a very sacrificial course, a very self-denying course. But I think our generation is walking a different course based on that foundation. So we shouldn't discount it, but I don't think we should necessarily be embracing that either. I think for our sake of our own children, right? I don't want my children to have to sacrifice even as much as I have now. And I want them to live in an environment where they can be free to express themselves and to really feel God and, have a community they can love and feel welcomed by. So I feel like Mother is just making sure our heart's in the right place. As she's lifting us up, she's also making sure we recognize the sacrifices that were made for our sake so that we could be here, so we could be born in a lineage that gives us a spiritual sensitivity that our parents weren't born with. And so we're very lucky. We're very fortunate in that way, and we should be grateful. She says, now, however, we live in the era of Chenoguk. This is when heavenly parents' dream, true parents' wishes, and the hope of all humankind can be fulfilled on earth. Yeah, so this is the time for our leadership where new things can happen, new dreams can be fulfilled. And I suspect, not as much of a sacrificial course. And I think we're experiencing that, like the miracles that are taking place, the people that we're reaching, last week we talked about what's happening in Africa and really working with heads of state and government leaders to work side by side together. It's just very exciting and significant. And, right now I'm preparing for a fact finders trip from the US Congress to go to Korea to meet with high-level Korean delegations. And I'm so surprised that so many of them are interested, and by so many, I mean 15 to 20, but it's not ever something I thought would happen. And I'm experiencing that in my lifetime, that people are standing with us because they see what we're doing. Therefore, I said, all religious people have arrived at their final destination and must disembark. Not only Christianity, but also Buddhism, Confucianism, and other religious beliefs have arrived at their final destination and must disembark. They must align here and meet God. To do this, they must meet the only begotten daughter, the Holy Spirit in substantial form, the Mother of Peace. This path alone has a future. And she's been mentioning this several times in her recent speeches, if you've noticed. She's over and over mentioning how the different religious groups, this is their final stop. Everyone needs to get off their train and meet the only begotten daughter. And the last sentence here, this path alone has a future, is very intriguing to me. And it makes me think, what's going to happen 50 years down the road if religions keep pushing their own agenda and keep pushing their own theology without being able to shift and align with true parents at this time. I mean, I think we're already sensing in our generation that religion's kind of becoming obsolete. It's not quite making enough sense for people. My kids are in a VBS right now, and today is the day that it's the very important day in VBS where they're going to teach about salvation. And they made a really big deal about it. But I know it's not enough. The idea that just belief is enough and accepting Jesus in your heart is where you receive salvation. I feel like for our generation outside the church, just in general, I feel like it's not enough to really answer the deep pains in our heart and the questions and the reality of the world. It's not enough to just have these kind of theological understandings. And I think the understanding of who true parents are practically is an answer to that. So I'm curious, where these religions would end up if we're not able to make these changes and become relevant. I was informed this morning that the 72 couples would be meeting today, so I spoke a few words to them. I said that now we are at our final destination, the time for harvest. And I have a little clip of that I wanted to show because it's just really sweet how much these 72 couples really love True Mother and are like so happy to see her. Let me make sure I'm sharing my sound here. Okay, this is just like a minute here.
Anniversary of this blessing, 35 of those blessed families gathered at the HJ Chalwan complex. True Mother wanted to give a special welcome to these 72 blessed families who were at the forefront of the providence at the very beginning of the movement.
만나서 반가워요. 꼭 다른지 60주년을 맞는 이날, 이제 하늘 부모님 성의 시대에 하늘 부모님을 지상에서 모시는 우리가 환경을 조율하고 있는 이 순간이 여러분들 60주년을 맞았지만은 새롭게 또 60주년을 바라보고 출발하는 날이 돼야 돼요. 네, 성경에서 말하는 끝날에 농부가 결심해야 하는 가라지, 알곡, 얘기 알고 있죠? 가라지에는 미래가 없어요. 알곡만이 미래가 있는 것이기 때문에 여러분들이 끝까지 그 책임을 하는 자리에서 다시금 연장이 되거나 탕감의 길이 남아지지 않는 그런 자리에 설 수 있도록 그렇게 결단하고 노력해 주세요.
True Mother then took a commemorative photo with these 72 couples.
Yeah, so super cute, right? But at the same time, she's saying the same thing to them as she's saying here. She's talking about separating the wheat from the weeds because it has a future, right? And I think how hard it must be for Mother to speak to these elder members like that too, right? And still expect something from them. But you can feel she's very serious about it. Like even the beginning, her first sentence of that clip was, I'm really looking forward to this era, this Chanoguk era, because she senses things are going to change. She can probably sense that big things are going to be happening in the future. Okay, in the Bible, and she references the same here, there is the example of a farmer. The farmer's workers went to him and said, the field is filled with weeds. We should pull them out. But the farmer replied that he was afraid the wheat would be spoiled. Let them grow together until harvest. The farmer said that at harvest time, the wheat would go into the storehouse at the gate of heaven. What did he say would happen to the weeds? He said there being no future use for them, that they would be burnt and disposed of. I think it continues here, yeah. So please know that you are the wheat of this era of Chanoguk, the era of the true parent, of the mother of peace. You must not lose that essence. Do not be afraid. Approach and teach Christians with confidence. Reveal the truth. Do you understand? And so, I mean, this kind of references the beginning of her speech here too. She's really highlighting that our generation, I think when she's speaking to YSP, she's speaking to us too. We are still young members of the church, and when we think about it. But she's saying that we are the wheat of this era, of this time, this Chanoguk time, and we should not lose that essence, that we are this precious beings who have future, and we should separate ourselves from the weeds. And what are the weeds? I don't know. I think we could all kind of ask that of ourselves, but I can say for my own spiritual life right now, I'm trying to separate out some of the thinkings and habits, even of our church community, that I now feel like don't align with where we should be heading, where not just me as a second generation, but under Mother's leadership too. I think there's a reason she's highlighting this generation. There's a purity to us. There's a sensibility, a spiritual sensibility to us that's hard to put into words, but it's because we're of true parents lineage. You know, it's not something that can be easily explained, but we're really fortunate. And I think it's been hard being a young leader in this church, because what we feel sometimes is correct and true doesn't always line up with the habits and traditions of our church. You know, I'm not saying like everything, but I'm saying certain aspects, certain cultural aspects of our church. And so there's this shift and change and kind of struggle that happens sometimes. But I think Mother is really lifting us up, because we're the we have the future. We can build a future because of who we are. Let this nation know they are the chosen people who should spread Heavenly Parents' dream and bring it to fruition all around the world. Yes, the mission of the chosen people is to live their lives in attendance of God. You understand this, don't you? May all citizens of this nation therefore receive the blessing through true parents, become the chosen people that fulfill all their responsibilities, and establish Heavenly Parents' homeland under Heavenly Parents' protection and blessing. So Mother is really commissioning these young people to have, you know, be able to fulfill our responsibility to really live in attendance to Heavenly Parent, not just in mind, but in heart, in genuine heart expression and life experience. And yeah, I think that's where it ends. So last sentence here is, may all citizens of this nation therefore receive the blessing through true parents, become the chosen people that fulfill all their responsibilities, and establish Heavenly Parents' homeland under Heavenly Parents' protection and blessing. So that's her commission to us as well. So those are my thoughts, and I am very curious for those who want to share their thoughts or reflections, and I will